All right, coming to you live, high above Congress Street. It's a System Failure Podcast, number 15.
Hey, Brian, how's it going for you this week?
Oh, pretty good. I can't believe we're up to number 15.
I know. I mean, what do you think the number is before we get to be where we're really good at this? What is it, like 50 maybe?
Well, I think it's safe to say, this is podcast 15, and so it's like we're still in our adolescence.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we'll start to mature, in our mid-20s or, knowing the history of NOPS, maybe in our 30s or 40s.
Yeah. We shouldn't put too much pressure on ourselves. I feel like 50 podcasts in, you would really start to gain a little bit of fluidity and rapport, and hopefully you will be able to speak without thinking about the fact that we're speaking into a microphone. It'll come naturally. So I don't know. I feel definitely a lot better at number 15 than I did at number 1. That's for sure. It was tough to get used to at first.
Well, we're making progress. So let's see what's going on here. Well, Thanksgiving is coming up. But you've been not in the office, eh?
Yeah, well, my one working as a consultant for Robert Half, I have been off for a couple of weeks because my one project ended, and so another one begins the Monday here after Thanksgiving. That one will be convenient because it'll be a work from home position, so I won't have to go into any office. So that's pretty sweet. I ordered a desk that's exactly like the one you have here, with a slightly different color top. And I've got the Capisco chairs from the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, which are a little bit like saddles. They're unusual chairs. That's going to be delivered on Monday, and so you'll have to come over and check that out whenever you get a chance.
Well, you'll really be able to research the People's Uprising in style.
Well, it's a major limiting reagent, to borrow a parlance out of chemistry, that the chairs and the desks are always at the worst heights. And so I do a lot of writing in public libraries or in the common area here in our apartment tower, and the posture, the ergonomics are absolutely brutal. And so I've suffered terribly, and I'm hopeful that I'll be able to focus for longer without the back starting to ache. And listeners of this podcast won't know, Brian, but you and I are both 6'4" in stature. And so that presents all manner of posture-related issues when it comes to spending long amounts of time peering into various computer monitors.
Being tall is both a blessing and a curse. Yeah. Especially as you get older. But yeah, you get like a wretched hump in your back, and that's aching for days.
Yeah. We're not, as a species, we're not meant to spend hours and hours peering into these crazy computer monitors, like with your eyes locked in a single position. So I don't know. I think maybe once in the future, maybe I'll look for a job, that doesn't involve computers. There's got to be some way to make a living that doesn't involve just sitting and peering. But also, like, some of the trades are notoriously really hard on your body, like construction and things like that. There's got to be a way to earn a living that doesn't come at horrible cost, or maybe that's the reality. We're all just selling our health a little parcel at a time each day.
Well, I think if you could get a job spear throwing, that would be ideal.
Spear throwing, yeah, chasing game on the savannas, that'd be nice.
Well, maybe the podcast will work.
Yeah, that would be sweet. Although that's going to involve a lot of, that's going to definitely involve computers. It's the way of the future.
Well, what else is going on? Well, we went to LFK with the captain on Friday.
Yeah. Oof. Man, I don't know. It was fun at the time, but the suffering was replete the next day. I mean, really, I feel like for me, I had to close the book on booze and alcohol. Virtually, I just maybe want to become like like one drink. Like, if you can enjoy like a nice blood red goblet of Pinotage in South Africa before your steak, why that's a fan. A little bit of booze will set the palate, like the conductor tapping his baton on the lectern to warm up the orchestra. That I can get behind, but man, there's just nothing at the end of that. There's nothing at the end of that journey, and journey is something we can talk about a little bit at the end of this podcast.
Well, when you're having a trenchant hangover, I guess you do get the opportunity to reevaluate your life's decisions and think about what you're doing going forwards. So I guess there is that upside.
Well, it was a capital evening, and I have to say that in the long run of things, I haven't. Some people can't seem to put the drink down once they start, and they just end up in a spiral where they get to where they don't even feel normal without the booze. But that hasn't been me. I'm able to put it down, no problem. And so in the final reckoning, I do feel like I have a lot of really positive memories with a lot of great people that revolve around alcohol. And well, I really can't recreate. I have to let those things be fond, rosy memories in the past. And the final analysis, it really has been. It's been great. It's been a great journey. But I think that Friday night definitely swung my. It definitely colored my perception that it's time to close the gate on that garden and move on to hopefully another better garden.
Well, my feeling certainly is, that I'm never drinking again after Friday night. But it is interesting, or just in comparison to smoking the weed, like suppose, if we just went on a crazy weed bender, I don't know, like I would be thinking about smoking the weed again. And at least one thing about alcohol is I want nothing to do with it.
Yeah, well, you're right. It's not the same positive feedback loop. It's not the same self-reinforcing behavior. So you're right. I guess that's one thing we can be grateful for, eh?
Yeah. All right. Well, what else do we want to get into? Should we continue our saga of talking about the goings-ons in the Middle East?
Yeah, I think you had an interesting point to bring up, one that I wasn't aware of. What is that?
Well, just Mike Baker was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and Mike Baker is allegedly used to be working for the CIA. I mean, it sounds like he's still working for the CIA. He's often on there putting like a pro-America spin on things. But anyway, just one factoid though that he brought up was that the Palestinians, or Hamas, only has like 30% support of the Palestinians. I Googled it, and I think what I found is it's about 34%. And so it was just hard not to think of the situation here in America. We have these Republicans or Democrats are in charge, but like about 35% of the population, I think, turns up to vote in a regular election. And no one actually likes these Democrats or Republicans, except that in this situation, well, people ask who the oppressors are. Jordan Peterson was also on Bill Maher.
Yes, this I saw.
Yeah, he was like, well, who are the oppressors here? Well, it's not the Palestinians who don't even support this crazy terrorist network that's in charge, and they're getting blown up by the thousands. Man, it's just a shocking statistic, I think.
Yeah, that is surprising. That's not daylight between Hamas and the Palestinians. I mean, even though Hamas is only in Gaza, not on the West Bank, reportedly, there's just not a lot. Those are just conflated, and there's not a lot of distinction in that. And to your point, I feel like that is a distinction well worth making. Your figure of 30-something% makes me think of. I think the latest polls have 78% Medicare for all, 78% support for Medicare for all across both parties. So if it's 78%, then there's 22% of us that are against Medicare for all, and it's like a almost similar number, 22%, 30%. And what it makes me think of is that we've got the vast majority of Americans are just held hostage by this two-party intrigue, where it's like Noam Chomsky said, you just allow incandescent debate, but within a very narrow range of opinion, and then everyone gets distracted by that sideshow, and the people who make millions and millions of dollars off of having the insurance companies as middlemen and collecting 50 cents of every one of our healthcare dollars, not providing surgeries, not handing out prescriptions for medication, but just shuffling paperwork, and somehow they end up with half the loot. It does seem like it is like you have to distinguish between people's political representatives and then the people themselves, and the decisions are being made by political representatives, but the bombing and the murder and mayhem and death and destruction is happening on the people. So I kind of just thought of the Palestinian cause, at least in Gaza, and Hamas is one and the same, but it is interesting. There's a little more resolution there because of what you're saying. Yeah,
well, I mean, they say that if Hamas was in control, they would wipe out all the Jews, which, it's in their charter, so I guess you could believe them. If the Jews were in control, well, they would maintain an open air prison for the Palestinians because that's what's been going on heretofore. It just makes me wonder, like, if the Palestinians were in control, though, as opposed to like Hamas, similar to what you're saying about Medicare. Like, if people were in control in the United States, then obviously we had universal health care. But if like the Palestinians were in control, would they be eliminating the Jews? Just in light of, you just gotta wonder, like, how bad is the situation? The impression I get, from looking at random videos online is that there's like a lot of hate for each other, but with a 34% statistic, maybe it's not as bad as it seems.
Well, the other world news today, the other world news this week is that the Osama bin Laden's letter about 9/11 went viral on TikTok, and so the Observer, I think it was the Observer website, removed it so that people couldn't look at it anymore.
I think it's the Guardian.
The Guardian, okay, the Guardian removed it so that people couldn't look at it anymore. And you're like, well, okay, it's not that we want to condone bin Laden or the blowing up of civilians here stateside or anywhere else, but the idea that bin Laden in Al Qaeda and the folks in the Middle East who hate America hate us because of our freedoms, which was the party line for a decade in the Bush regime. Like, the idea they hate us for our freedoms is not really what they're telling themselves, right? They have a very concrete list of political grievances, and that's why I turned off the Mike Baker, Joe Rogan. I want to yell. I just want to yell. Would somebody acknowledge the land grab? Like, it's not that. I really like it. May be that there's some amount of Jew hatred or anti-Semitism. We've talked about the financial roots of a lot of that previously on this podcast. But the idea that the land grab doesn't factor in at all or can just be overlooked doesn't really seem like an honest assessment of the situation. That's what I wonder about with Mr. Mike Baker and his CIA credentials, his intelligence bona fides. I'm like, dude, how can we really trust? Can we really trust his analysis? And of course, we had JBP, as you mentioned, on Bill Maher, talking about how people identify the Palestinians as the oppressed and the Jews as the oppressors, as if like we have completely projected that onto the situation. Seems like, what? I mean, it's like there has been a land grab in living memory. Now, I mean, I understand that there's ancient history and medieval history and Ottoman history, but like there has been a land grab in living memory, and I just can't take anyone seriously who doesn't want to factor that into the equation. I mean, I'm down to factor some anti-Semitism in, crazy as that sounds to me, but we got to be down to factor the land grab in too, just in the way that we're never going to understand Al Qaeda and the true motivations behind 9/11 if we just go around assuming that they hate us for our freedoms and that's why they're lashing out. And it has nothing to do with our ridiculous military intervention and misadventures in their territory. So anyway, that was what I thought on the several media appointments that you just mentioned.
Yeah, well, it seems like some classic whataboutism. Or it just goes back to what I was saying. Well, it just seems like the defense for Israel is that, well, if the Arabs were in control, they would eliminate all the Jews. So we're just going to be okay with the status quo, I guess, is the logic.
Yeah, well, that's where the distinction between Hamas and the Palestinian people has to come in. And I mean, there's just going to be when you do land grabs or you intervene in people's politics, you're going to generate some hatred. I just think that, oh man, Pat Buchanan, I think that Dave Smith has been crowing Pat Buchanan's old line about how the price of imperialism is terrorism, and if you do not wish to pay the price of terrorism, you must cease and desist with the empire. I think that, I mean, I've not been known to agree with old Pat Buchanan ever, but I do like that quote. It does seem like, yeah, you're going to occupy people and systematically strip them of their natural resources and their sovereignty. You're going to have to live with some blowback. And it's interesting, the mythology we kind of tell ourselves here at the Heart of Empire to grapple with that blowback, because it's hard for us to understand it.
Well, it also just makes me wonder, just a couple podcasts ago, I was talking about that op-ed from the Times of Israel where, they were suggesting that, Netanyahu wants to keep Hamas because it'll prevent like a legitimate two-state solution and carry on the status quo. I mean, it seems like there's a strong energy just to, push the Palestinians into the sea, which is certainly not different than keeping Hamas around. Although, I mean, what are the chances they can actually accomplish that goal? But I don't know, I guess, like just here in America, we have African Americans feel underrepresented and like they're getting the shaft at every opportunity, while the Republicans and Democrats continue to be in control. And so, is it the same situation in Israel where like Hamas and Israel benefit from each other being in power? I think on the Mike Baker podcast, they were just talking about how all this, like the leaders of Hamas are like billionaires because like all the aid like has to come through them, and they're basically like gangsters. And so like the status quo is extremely beneficial to them. And then, well, if the Times of Israel op-ed is to be believed, then the status quo is also beneficial for, the Netanyahu as well. So it seems like a shocking situation where the powerful people at the top are gaining and, everyone else is getting the shaft.
What a surprise.
I know. So, I guess that's what I have to say about the Middle East this week.
Well, on the slightly related note, they had Ted Cruz on that same Bill Maher from 2 weeks back, banging on about his new book about the horrors of cultural Marxism, and that's a common JBP trope as well. And I thought about a half dozen times during that particular Bill Maher episode that like, I don't understand this cultural Marxism business. I don't think that's anywhere in the writings of Karl Marx himself. He did analyze economic power and analyze economics in terms of power, and power, usually has an oppressor and an oppressed. But I do think that like it's like people don't have any idea what Karl Marx really had to say in his books. No one bothers to crack them, and telling people that like the cultural Marxism, the excesses of woke is somehow related to the economic ideas of Herr Marx. It's just like, I do agree with that. I agree with JBP to a certain extent in the sense that people are projecting the roles of oppressor and oppressed everywhere, and sometimes inappropriately, and we can argue about where those roles are appropriately applied and not. But there's no question that a whole generation of people under 40 in this country are waking up to the fact that they're not going to be owning a home, for example. And everyone is aware that the medical system's a scam, even though we have overwhelming majority in favor of a Medicare for all solution. So it is definitely true that there is some kind of some kind of fuckery afoot. And it's maybe people can't identify the bars of the cage that they're trapped in very well, or they're having trouble doing that. But when you're not going to be owning a home or having a retirement or being able to afford children or all of these things that people expected that previous generations took for granted, like it's no wonder that people it's no wonder the young kids are like labeling oppressor and oppressed, even if it's in a confused and ham-fisted fashion. It's just no wonder people are drawn to the works of Karl Marx, and I do feel like the opponents of Karl Marx want to point to the like I say, the worst excesses of the woke movement, or whatever the most ridiculous examples are, and try to invalidate the entire Marxist critique based on that. And I don't think it's just not going to get any traction. It's never going to go anywhere. People are waking up to the fact that something's wrong. America is the most wealthiest country in all of history. But we have a crazy wealth distribution that you'd have to go back to pharaonic Egypt, or maybe Rome in its in its early imperial or late imperial period, or the Gilded Age here in America back in the 19th century. We tried solving this problem with reform in the form of the New Deal, and so is it going to have to be revolution? I mean, it's like the old JFK quote: "Those who make peaceful reform impossible make violent revolution inevitable." I don't exactly remember the quote, but it goes something like that. So,
well, it's a clever obfuscation, I think, because, as you said on the podcast before, Marx was excited about capitalism because it brought an end to the monarchs, and then it brought about this new system that was inevitably going to collapse under its own weight, and then, bring about the People's Revolution, hopefully. And so when people complain about cultural Marxism, it seems like what they're complaining about is this faux wokeism that's like manufactured by the establishment to distract us from the collapse of the establishment. Right?
That's a great point. Yeah, that's really where that's perfect. Yeah.
That's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, it's the people who don't do any work but are collecting all of the wealth. It happened again, just like it did in the medieval period when you had people sit up in their castle collecting all of the all of the fruits of the labor of their subjects. And it's happened again, though that dynamic system has given way, and its technology is the specific medium by which this happens, has given way to a system where workers are less and less relevant with each passing year, with each new technological advancement. And finally, you get to a point where people own these colossal means of production, but the colossal means of production don't really require much in the way of workers. That shifts the economic balance of power, and you end up with a bizarre situation like the one we're in now. So anyway, yeah, those are interesting points all. I have this experience. It's so great to have an actual pod where I can actually say the thing, or so often have listened to podcasts and you just are frustrated by the fact that no one is saying the obvious thing, like maybe about the land grab.
Well, it seems like this knot needs to be untangled about Marxism because, the bit about cultural Marxism is such a canard, right? Yeah. It seems like a real problem. And so, I don't know, maybe our claim to fame can be like unthreading this idea. And I mean, it should be, I guess, a bigger talking point, right? That like Marx like supported capitalism to bring about change. And it's just like, it seems like obvious in light of the past couple election cycles here in the good old US of A that the system obviously is collapsing under its own weight. And it seems obvious, this cultural Marxism, or whatever you want to call it, is clearly a byproduct of the establishment collapsing, rather than, the ill in somehow acknowledging what Marx had to say in the first place. Yeah. Let's not. It's like a rodeo clown. The rodeo clown is dancing and waving his arms and trying to distract us, the bull, from keeping our eye on the prize. I think that the fastball we got to be keeping our eye on is the distinction between earned and unearned income. When you think about things like rent and interest, things like that, and monopoly rent, those really are the parasites that are just sucking our economy dry, like a dead whale carcass in the ocean. And we have to start seeing those distinctions just like the early capitalists did, so we can free ourselves from the parasite and move on to a more glorious future, and so we can reproduce our society 10 years, 20 years, 50 years down the line, and we don't end up in the collapse situation prophesied by Mr. Karl Marx. Yeah. Well, hey, and speaking of the distinction between earned and unearned income, the news out of Argentina this week is pretty entertaining. We had the election of Mr. Javier Milei, who he does seem kind of unhinged, but he also seems hilarious, which I totally respect. I like the way that he presents himself, but I worry that his economic ideas are just going to, even if he could get them passed, they're just going to destroy, dig Argentina. Argentina is one of these countries that has defaulted many times to the International Monetary Fund. And every time they default, they have to get a new loan. And every time they get a new loan, the IMF demands that they sell off more of their infrastructure to private investors, private foreign investors, and that they cut their social spending in order to raise them, and then jack up taxes in order to raise the money they need to pay off the loans. And it's just a terrible. I just don't see how. Is his plan to try to pull in Italy and give an FU to the IMF?
The Greeks?
Oh, yeah, that's
the exact opposite plan, right? His plan is to adopt the U.S. dollar and slash government spending, cut out all the various ministries that comprise the Argentine government, and jack up taxes so that he can raise the wealth needed to pay off these loans. Whereas Varoufakis and the Syriza Party of Greece in 2009, 10, 11, their plan was to say, we're not paying back these loans. We've already paid back many times the principal, and we're not selling off our public infrastructure, and we're not slashing government services, thereby exacerbating unemployment. It's like they tried to pull out of their death spiral, and they couldn't pull it off. I think I'll have to look in. Economist Michael Hudson once told a story about then Vice President Joe Biden being dispatched to make it clear to the Greeks that they did not have the option to default on their loans and they were going to pay no matter what. And that's something we'd have to look into for ourselves versus taking someone else's word for it. But it certainly did not work. So yeah, it seems like this whole radical anarcho-capitalist ideal is just exactly the opposite of putting up your middle finger to the IMF and just embracing the death spiral.
Well, it doesn't seem like it would be a popular idea. I guess I'll have to investigate him further. Like, I don't know how he sold this to the Argentinians. Like, I mean, obviously, getting out of debt seems like a good long-term strategy, but it seems like usually like short-term suffering for long-term gain is not a popular notion.
I think it was 2018. The last president did the same thing. He didn't abolish the central bank of Argentina, but he did accept a whole crazy raft of austerity measures and fired a bunch of government workers. And the situation there has been miserable. The price of there's a lot of government-run utilities like gas and water, and the price of those things have shot up like 10 times just in the past couple of years. So it's easy to see how a crank like him got elected, because it's just pure chaos and dysfunction down there. But the libertarian sort of concept that we're just going to shrink the government, I don't think it's going to ultimately be. What you want to do is invest in things that eventually make you more money, and that's how you pay off the loans, versus imposing austerity and just killing jobs and driving up the prices for everyone, and increasing misery. But we'll see how it all plays out down there. It'll be interesting. I didn't pay too much attention to Argentine history before this week, so I'll have to definitely look more into it as the weeks wear on.
Well, I mean, if he can live up, to his mustache, that'll be good.
Yeah. The man is clearly crazy looking, but I do love the way that he just there's a famous video of him. He has a whole, he has like a whiteboard with stickers on it that shows the geometry of the Argentine government, and he's pulling off stickers and just being like, this ministry's cut, this ministry's cut. I think that is hilarious. I mean, it's just it's nice to see his disrespect for the status quo. Anyway, we could stand some of that here stateside.
Well, I don't know what you're supposed to do if you're a South American country like under the thumb of the IMF. So hopefully he works something out down there.
Yeah, this program's been tried in Chile and it's like it never works out well, because you end up privatizing for profit the sections of your economy that should be run on a sort of communal good for all basis. And I don't know, we'll see. It's really entertaining. It feels like just another example of the pot boiling more and more as the weeks wear on here in 2023.
All right. Well, so what was the other thing we wanted to talk about? Alchemy?
Yeah, well, so there is when you're in the depths of this ties back into the initial conversation we had here about going boozing and then feeling the terrible regret the next morning. It's the idea that's expressed by the words, "It's always darkest before the dawn." You've heard this one before. The history here is one that you're going to be familiar with, and so is everyone. There's this idea of Homer's Odyssey that you might recall. Did you ever have to read Homer's Odyssey when we were in school?
I did, at least chunks of it.
Yeah, they didn't have us read the whole thing. We just went through it in chunks. And so that was the foundational myth of Greek culture. And the Aeneid by Virgil, the Roman poet, is less well known, but the idea here is obviously the Odyssey is about the return from the Trojan War, trying to get back home to Ithaca, the hero's Odysseus. And so basically this guy, when Rome rose and conquered Greek culture, conquered the Greek peninsula, and then added Greek culture to its mythical body, this Roman poet named Virgil created a poem called the Aeneid about this guy Aeneas, who was a character who was at the Trojan War, and he supposedly left the ruins of Troy. He was a Trojan prince, and then he was integral in founding Rome. So it's this story, again, about a journey where it ties in Rome with this Greek mythology. And then you have, if now you fast forward to the Renaissance, and you have the Divine Comedy with Dante. And of course, who is Dante's guide through hell, and then through purgatory, and then finally through heaven? It's the same. This Roman poet Virgil is the character in Dante's Inferno. So you have like the initial story of this journey, and then you have other huge pieces of literature that involve a journey. and that pile on top of it and just kind of keep time with the great rises and falls of Western civilization over the millennia. And so that idea has a magical counterpart called the Alchemical Journey, where you have to descend into the Negredo or the abyss in order to arise and complete something called the magnum opus or the great work. But the part that interests us is this idea that you really have to go through hell in order to make it to heaven, right? Do you find that, like, do you find in your life, Brian, that you put things off to the last moment? Are you a terrible procrastinator like me?
Well, sure.
Yeah. See, I feel like that's really what we're talking about here. There's like an individual version of this and a cultural version of this that we just outlined some fairly dark goings on in modern history that I think are a sign of us descending into the abyss like Dante did or any number of people before him. If the notion is that ideas compete with each other, like animals, like you have a specific genetic makeup, and these specific genetic makeups compete with each other in the guise of species, and then Darwinian competition weeds out the species that are most functional, or the genetic codes that are most functional. You can say the same thing is true of ideas, and that's why this idea of the alchemical journey keeps popping up over and over again. And I wonder, this is what's on my mind lately. I wonder if there's not an energy conservation aspect to this. Like, is it part of our nature? Do we have it, like, in the same way that Darwinian evolution amongst genetic codes gives rise to specific structures like lungs or kidneys or a brain or arms or eyes? The idea here, and this is Platonism 101, right? The idea here is that the journey through the journey through history sees ideas competing against each other in just the same way, and the ideas that are most functional end up being the ones that get repeated and passed down and reproduced over and over again. And I'm wondering if it isn't like, you know how the like cheetahs, they lie around all day but they have one burst of energy when it comes time to track down their prey. Is that us? Is there a calorie conservation part of this where we don't raise a finger until things get bad, and that's just a mental structure we all have and it's built into us to some degree or another? That's what's been rattling around my brain recently. I have a Substack coming out about that soon. It was interesting to arrive in Florence, and one of the Medici's many palaces there in Florence, and I think we've talked about in this pod before, is the Palazzo Pitti, and out behind that palazzo is this hedge maze that is arranged according to this idea of the alchemical journey. You can either the starting point and the ending points are both statues of the goddess Demeter, who appears in the Odyssey. Who appears in the hymn to Demeter, which is supposedly ascribed to Homer, the same man who wrote the Odyssey. And the Medicis placed a statue of Demeter as the start and at the end of the hedge maze, but you can see the end from the start, and you can walk straight there. But their point was they wanted to find out if the people who were visiting their palace were fluent in this notion of the alchemical journey and would understand what they were looking at, that you could take this big, long, circuitous route through the hedge maze, or you could go straight from start to finish with no problem. But if people could recognize that, then they would recognize that they were speaking to somebody who was trustworthy, or who understood the language of magic, or who understood the heretical ideas that the Catholic Church at that time had put a ban on. So all that is very interesting. And I wonder if it's not a part of the archetypical structure of all of our minds, this alchemical journey.
Well, I mean, I think homeostasis is what we sort of strive for. And then, we'll have large periods of change. I think it's obviously it's better if you can not procrastinate until the last minute. And the people who are able to do so seem happier.
Yeah, well, and then they can also achieve excellence, right? Isn't the path to excellence repudiation of procrastination? Aren't they like two sides of the two opposite poles? Is that how you perceive it?
Yeah, so is walking the hedge maze like a repudiation of procrastination?
Well, that's what I'm suggesting. That's the layer, the spin I'm putting on it. It's like when like everyone knows the story of the son of the rich, robber baron who just is a total screw up and can't be, because there's value in the journey, right? That's the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. The plot is exactly this. The thing of value is buried in the front yard where the main character departs from the very beginning of the book, and he has to go on this big long journey only to realize the whole thing was right back at the start that he was looking for. But what you're looking for is not really the thing. What you're looking for is the journey. There's value in the journey. So yeah, interesting stuff. Anyway, it really the magical ideas really have a much bigger impact on history than we realized. We live in a strange, the Catholic Church, the Roman Church, in this destruction of all pagan ideas at the time that that Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire. It's like this weird corner in time that we can't see back around. It looks like the ideas of Christianity just arose suddenly because we can't see what came before. Well, that's what the Renaissance really was. It was a revisiting of the ideas that came before Christianity, a rediscovery of the ideas that came before Christianity, and it's characterized by this Italian Renaissance, which is really excellence, in any number of arts. That's undeniable. You can just look at these works of art and go, that is it. Whether it's architecture or painting or sculpture, you can just look at, or music. You can look at it and be like, this is undeniably excellent. And maybe the idea of the alchemical journey is some of the gas that fueled the flame of the Italian Renaissance. If this connection between being lazy and procrastinating in the alchemical journey that I'm trying to make is a valid one. So that's where my mind has been, especially since Saturday morning when I woke up with a truly trenchant hangover.
Well, so there is this thing where, human DNA and, monkey DNA are, 95% similar or something like that. But I guess it comes down to the question of nature versus nurture. But, your environment, though, shapes, how your genes express themselves. So, I mean, obviously, in a healthy environment, you get a better looking human being, I suppose. But also as wolves were tamed into dogs or whatever, I mean, they just get softer looking features and they look less aggressive. And so I don't know if it relates to if ideas are somehow the same way, where they have a certain coding, but I don't know, they adapt to their environment somehow. So maybe there's some kind of nature versus nurture that applies to memes as well, and how they express themselves and what we're capable of as people. And then, well, maybe the same idea, just maybe in times of dramatic change or whatever, I don't know, the ideas express themselves differently somehow.
Well, I mean, I think you're exactly right. There's definitely an aspect of nature versus nurture here. How do we know? It's because all these guys in the same time in the 15th century had the same idea, had the ideas about the Italian Renaissance in the same moment. They were feeding off of each other, feeding off their environment. It's definitely you definitely need to have all. If you're just in a pure survival situation, you're not going to be able to achieve the transcendent glory of St. Peter's Basilica, for example, in the Vatican City. There is an element of, you need to have, in order to properly embark on the archetypical alchemical journey, you have to have a few basic ingredients in place, and then when you have conditions that are really good, you can achieve unbelievable heights of mastery or of beauty, or of showing people the inside of your head, and other people showing you the inside of their head. You can achieve much higher heights of excellence if you have the right context, or the right pieces in place, I suppose.
Well, it seems like we're on a decline. And so maybe if we're not on a societal decline, I mean, I guess things would be different. Or maybe the decline will create the get the circumstances.
That's it. Yes.
For the change, and coding of the ideas, I guess, is set up for that maybe. And So I mean, I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's really the great thing about the alchemical journey. As we sail further into chaos, it's easy to be alarmed and upset, and there can be a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth. But I do think that things have to get. I think it's baked into who we are as humans that things have to get really bad so that they can get better. So you have to have a little bit of faith through the dark night of the soul is ultimately the lesson of the alchemical journey, and to not freak out or to not despair, even as things get crazier and crazier. And so, if you're one of those people like me who's like never going to be able to afford a house, then you can just like try to have some faith in the alchemical journey and not freak out. Not freak out too much is the positive spin I'm putting on these the deplorable world events that we mentioned at the top of the pod, trying to make it seem like maybe there's a silver lining to the intensifying dark cloud by making reference to this ancient idea of the alchemical journey.
Right. And maybe it'll pass like a trenchant hangover.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly. I couldn't have said it better. Yeah, that's very funny. Yes, this too will pass. That's what you got to remember when your legs are cycling under the sheets and you got the sweats on. You're like, why? Yeah.
Well, I guess you pretty much always want to like stick to your fundamentals, and not do anything crazy.
Yeah. Try to have discipline versus a lack of virtue, which is what was on prominent display on Friday night. There can be no question about that.
All right. Well, I guess that's about wraps it up then, eh?
Yeah, that'll do it for another exciting edition of System Failure Podcast. We do want to invite people to send us an email at knop@substack.com. That's KNOPP @substack.com. And if you want to read about the alchemical journey and a great many other stimulating ideas, why head on over to knop.substack.com, where you can find the back catalog of this podcast, in addition to my Substack essays. So we hope to see you online, folks.
All right.